Good afternoon, everyone. It's Julianne Grant. Welcome to Razorleaf's Unpacking 3D Experience webinar series. We welcome you this afternoon. We're going to be talking about managing collaborative access. Here with my presenter and master 3D experience expert here at Razorleaf, Kip Speck. And we just wanted to mention that this is our 9th webinar in the Unpacking 3D Experience series. So if you happen to miss some of the other ones, just look them up on YouTube. They're all under Unpacking 3D Experience. We've been building on this information for quite some time. So we are going to send this recording out, and we are going to take questions at the end. So please put questions in the panel as you go along and as you think of them, and we'll get to them as we get towards the end of the presentation. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Kip.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm Kip Speck with Razorleaf Corporation. I am a senior pre-sales solution architect. And as we talked about, we'll be talking about managing collaborative access in today's webinar. Welcome, and thank you for joining the webinar series, Unpacking 3D Experience, Managing Collaborative Access. What we'll see today is the use of companies, collaborative spaces, and bookmarks to grant access to specific data. We'll look at defining access to data, using collaborative spaces to your security benefit, using bookmarks with collaborative access to share access, accessing 3D model data with collaborative access. Start with talking about a little bit about companies in the 3D Experience platform. Companies can have subsidiaries, plants, business units, skills, departments, and even resource managers. Companies can have host or parent companies. The company that you belong to gives you inherited security to certain collaborative space data, even if you're not directly added to the space. You can manage users based on the company. Users can be added to departments and other business units or business structure entities. You can add users to more than one company, and companies can be defined as suppliers or even customers. Collaborative spaces. Well, collaborative spaces are not storage containers or drives. Collaborative spaces are part of the security context that manages objects, data, and users' access. When users access a widget, a web app, or a native app, they select the collaborative space as the active collaborative space. An object can only belong to one collaborative space. When you save objects, you select the collaborative space it will belong and be assigned to. However, you can move objects from one collaborative space to another. Collaborative space can be public, protected, or private types. Users have roles as leader, author, owner, etc. in collaborative spaces. So let's take a look a little bit more in depth about collaborative spaces and space visibility and the user role. So collaborative space public means that all content that is added to that space is visible to everybody who has access to the platform. Protected is visible to users logged into that collaborative space if the organization that owns the content is the same as the organization or company that they belong to. So if I belong to company A and I put some object in the collaborative space that is owned by company A, I will be able to see it. Private is only visible to users logged into that collaborative space, meaning you must be granted access to it. I'll go back to protected for a moment, and whether I'm added to that protected collaborative space or not, is if I belong to the company that owns that collaborative space, when those objects move to a released or obsoleted status, maturity state, I will then be able to see it, whether I'm added to that collaborative space or not. Standard manages standard components, and it adds a prefix of a small s to the components added or parts and document data added to there so that you can identify that it's a standard component. User access roles. There's a reader, an author, contributor, and leader. Reader, author, contributor, and leader. Now, there's also owner, and owner and leader can be combined together as one role or separated based on your preferences. So I won't go through all the definitions, but understand there are 4 different roles, and these are not your licenses, but these are the roles you play in the different collaborator spaces. So what is the security context? Now, this isn't your login credentials. This is when you, after you log in, when you're working with either a widget or a web app or a native app or any of the data, whenever you're set your security context, that gives you access and visibility to certain things. So the security context is made up of company plus collaborator space plus your access role. That's what we mean by security context. So after you've logged into the platform and have been authenticated, then you, whatever app or widget that you're using, you select your credentials as what collaborator space, what company, what collaborator space, and what role you have. And it's a little bit easier on some of the native apps. The screen looks like this. So you'll see that the collaborator space is production, the organization or company is company name, and your role is leader. Okay? So that's what a security context is, and that's how you access data inside of the platform. Companies for today's collaborative access webinar, we will be using supplier company 001, and we'll be using the default company named company name. So those are the 2 companies that we'll be using for today's demonstration. And company name, which is the default company that comes with the platform, on cloud or on premise, is the one we will use as our engineering company, and the engineer belongs to that company. My supplier or designer that we are using as the other person in this will belong to the supplier company and is an employee of that company. So collaborative spaces for collaborative access, we've created we have 2 collaborative spaces, mainly engineering and supplier 001. When we define when a collaborative space is created, we define the types of collaborative space: private, public, protected, and that controls access to data and maturity in inherited access. Assigned users based on access requirements. Users can have different roles. So in engineering, I may be a leader. I may have another collaborative space that is production, and I might only be an author. And those roles give you specific commands or access to specific commands inside of those collaborative spaces. For instance, in engineering, I may be able to promote something from in work to frozen all the way to released as an owner or a leader. Now in production, I might be an author or contributor only, and I can only progress it to, let's say, frozen. I can't just release it because I don't have that security role. Okay, so the roles that you have in the collaborative space give you access to other functions in the platform. So here are the 2 collaborative spaces we'll use. Engineer belongs to both. As you can see on the left, you have engineer here, and on the right, you also have engineer here. This is done because as the engineer, the content that's created in this collaborative space, I want to be able to share. In order to do that, I have to be able to have access to that collaborative space. So you'll also notice that the designer in the supplier collaborative space has no access to this collaborative space. And the reason is I don't want them to inherit any access to any data that's in this collaborative space whatsoever. Okay. So the supplier has here. Now it might be that the supplier is going to create some data, and when they do, they will store it in the supplier collaborative space. And because the engineer has access to that collaborative space, they'll be able to see the content that's created here. Okay. Again, just another graphic to show you that the engineer and designer, the designer has no access to the engineering collaborative space, and then the engineer and designer both have access to the supplier collaborative space. So when we look at the collaborative space as a member, just to show you, as a member of engineering and supplier collaborative spaces, and you'll see this later on, engineer can see both the content in both, regardless of the maturity state of the objects in them. an object can only belong to one collaborative space. Okay, so if I search for a specific object, in this case the demo TNM-VED flat structure object that we'll be using for today's demonstration or webinar, you'll see that it only exists in one collaborative space and is not in the other. And I've done this specifically to point out that during our presentation, our webinar, at no time do I put that structure into the other collaborative space. Okay, at no time does it ever get moved or added to the other collaborative space. So how do we do that? Well, we share data with users in a different company. Sharing specific objects with users, other companies, extends the security context without giving the user access to the collaborative spaces. So you can control if the user can view it or edit it or download down to the specific object. So if I have an assembly in 3 or 4 subcomponents at different levels, at each level I can choose whether they can view it or edit it, right? So that's on the objects themselves. So this also helps us reduce the need to duplicate data, meaning that if I need a supplier to have access to data or another department, maybe it's procurement, maybe it's another group, and they need to be able to see it, I can share those objects into that other, into a bookmark that we'll use to be able to, for them to see the data. So we will share the data with them, but we'll control what they can do with it, view or edit or manage different things like that, so that they can have access to those specific data. If it's an assembly and I say give them access to the assembly, then I have to give them access to subcomponents as well. So you have granularity there as well. I can also put objects in multiple bookmarks. So I might have a bookmark for engineering, I might have a bookmark for supplier, or I might have, as I said, a bookmark for procurement. And I might have 3 or 4 different suppliers, and I want them to see different parts of the assembly. I might put the top level assembly in each one of their respective bookmarks, but I might share specific data underneath that top level assembly with different suppliers because I don't want them knowing what the other supplier has access to. It might be a competitive situation. I might only want procurement to see certain things at certain times, right? So I can share the data across bookmarks or multiple bookmarks at any given time, and I can revoke that access very easily as well. All right, so let's see what it looks like in the demonstration. So we'll go through the entire process and show you what it looks like. Here we're going to take a look at the company structure inside of 3DEXPERIENCE. First, when we log in, we're in the dashboard. How do we get there? So we look at our compass. We're going to use the Collaboration and Approvals web app. It's not a widget, it's a web app. We'll click on that. And it'll bring us to this interface where we have logged in as the administrator, and we've selected the default collaborative space. And this is a special collaborative space. It allows us to set administrative settings and things like that. So we are in as the admin platform, and this is, again, this is an on-premise implementation. On the cloud, you would log in as a admin user and still set your collaborative space to default. So under the categories, you'll see where there's companies. I'm going to select companies, and you'll notice I already have this one that says company name host. This is the default company that is added to the platform when it's installed. On the cloud, it's that name and that's the type, okay? On-premise and on cloud. I've already added one called supplier, and we'll take a look at company name first, the default company, and the members. And under the members, we're going to be using the Razorleaf engineer. We may be using Razorleaf manager, but you'll see that these 2 users are part of this company, and it says that they are employees. Okay. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to take a look at my supplier company that I created, and I'll look at members, and you'll notice that the Razorleaf designer an employee of this company. So we're going to treat this user as if he was part of a external company, a supplier, something that we brought into the platform to be able to work. But we want to control access of what this user can see. So to do that, we want to make sure that the security context that we discussed before, it allows this user to pick the supplier company name, supplier CO001, and you'll see that later, and their user and what role that they have. Okay. So again, I've got two companies, company name, which is the default, and then supplier one. Up here, you'll see that on premise, you can say create company, you can create supplier, or you can create a customer. Okay. This probably may or may not show up in your implementation. It may be part of some of the things that we have installed on our implementation on premise. But for right now, you could either select a supplier or a company. For today's purpose, I'm going to say company. Okay. In the way, whether you create a company or supplier, the strategy going forward is the same. Okay. So you give it a name, and you put a description, and you'll notice there's a parent company. So if this is a child company to something else or a subsidiary, things like that, then you can put in. You can create your own ID, maybe a DUNS number, a cage code, things like that. And cage code for A&D, aerospace and defense, is important. Maybe what their website is, things like that. What's their address, postal code, resource manager, and their cost, what their rate or standard cost basis is. So I can click OK. I'm sorry. I'll go ahead and click OK, and it creates that company. And over here, I can go to members, and I can add more members here. Now, I can add members from other companies in here as well. They just will not be an employee. So it's a little bit beyond today's demonstration, but just know that you can add users to multiple companies. And there's a strategy for why you would do that and things like that as well, but it's beyond today's scope. So now that we've created the company, the supplier, and we've added the user to the supplier, the next thing we want to do is create a collaborative space that they belong to. And we want to create a bookmark structure for sharing information or collaborating between the main engineering group and the supplier. So let's take a look at the collaborative space that I've created. So I'll go to Platform Management. And under Platform Management, there's a Content tab. Now, we're going to be looking at the collaborative spaces. And right now, I've got an engineering collaborative space. And I can look at Manage Members. And you'll see that Razorleaf Engineer and Admin Platform have access to that. And here you'll see the company, the supplier company I created. And nobody there has any access. You don't see the supplier here. And that's intentional, and you do not want to add the supplier here, because when you do, then they will be able to see everything in that collaborative space. So the first thing is in the engineering collaborative space, where your company is doing all the design work and documentation and everything else, they have access to all that data, and as their role as part of the security context, so they'll log in as company name, their username, the company name, and if leader, owner, author, things like that. So contributor, author, leader, owner, right? So whatever the security context you give them for this collaborative space, it's what they would log in as or set their security context to. Now, again, note that the supplier does not have any access here into this engineering collab space, and that's by design. Okay. So now let's look. I've already created a supplier collaborative space. So I'm going to look at the managed members on it. And you'll notice here that the company name, the host company, I've added the Razorleaf Engineer under that company as leader owner. And again, admin platform is leader owner as well. They're also the main owner of this collaborative space. You also notice that I've added Razorleaf Designer under the supplier company name as an author, right? So I don't want to give them any more permissions than that, but they're an author in this collaborative space. Okay, so the author has limited functionality. of being able to approve things or be part of routes or different things like that. So I limit them to author to restrict what they can and can't do in the platform. And again, they're through that supplier company one that I created, we've added them there. Okay. So to create a collaborative space, it's pretty simple. You say create collaborative space. You give it a name, a title, description. Your family is a designer standard. So I'm going to leave it as design. And then the visibility we talked about earlier, whether it's private, protected, or public. So this is where you set it. Now, if you're unsure, start with the most restrictive, and then if you need to open it up more, then you can. I can't remember on the current structure if you open it up too much, if you can roll it backwards to more restricted. I don't think you can, but maybe they've changed that in later FPs. So I'll go ahead. You can go create name, title, description, family, and visibility. Okay, so that's what I did to create the supplier 01. Now, the other part of that is I want to be able to create a bookmark structure to where the users can view data or view files and things like that, where we can set up the sharing and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to go back over here to my collaboration and approvals, my web app as the administrator. And if I look down here on the left-hand side, if I scroll down, there's what's called bookmark routes. Now, you can do this in a widget. I just wanted to show you a couple different ways to do it. So one of the things I did is I created a bookmark route called VED supplier. So it's as simple as, I have to change mine here, and I'm going to set the collaborative space to supplier one company and leader. Okay, and this is just security. The security context I was in, it would have created that bookmark route in the default collaborative space, which is a special space. So under here I can say create bookmark, or I can use the wizard to do that. It's pretty easy, so I just say create bookmark. So I've already created one called VED supplier, so let's take a look at that. And you'll notice that under VED supplier, and again, I'm showing you this interface just to give you a different flavor of it. Under VED supplier, I can look at sharing, and you'll see under the sharing, and you can kind of think of this as how you extend the security model or extend the security access of these objects. Okay, so you'll notice that I have added Razorleaf Engineer and Razorleaf Designer here, and because I created it under the collaborative space, when I created this bookmark, I selected the supplier 01 collaborative space. So anybody that belongs to that collaborative space will have inherited access as supplier 01. But I wanted to add Razorleaf Designer and only give them view access. And then Razorleaf Engineer, I gave them edit access. Now I could have changed it or something. I could have given them view, read, add, remove attachments, edit, or manage, right? So this is what I mean by you can extend the security based on the bookmark structure that you use, okay? And then underneath that, so again, I added the users and I set them what their permissions are and things like that. So underneath the bookmark root is where you have actual bookmark folders, kind of the folder structure. So you'll see I have a chassis one. I'm going to select that. And again, under the sharing, I can say what type of share, the same users or things like that. And you can set this up to inherit the security from the parent or not. I did not. I set it. I told it not to do it. So if I look at properties and I set inherit permissions to know when I created this bookmark underneath the bookmark root. So if you don't set it to no, the default is yes. If you don't set it to no, then whatever the security of the parent is, that's what you're going to get. So anyway, so if I edit this, let's see, I don't have the ability to change the inherit, right? So think about how you want to do this before you just run off and do them, okay? So under sub bookmarks, I can keep adding more and more and more, but essentially, if I look at the tree view over here, I've created the bookmark root VED supplier and chassis. Now maybe I have a supplier a different, that same supplier, maybe they work, maybe they're going to help me design the body in white or panels or other things. So I might create a different bookmark route that is specific for those type of objects, and I might give additional or change the access model to those, right? But if I had a different supplier, I'd probably create a different bookmark structure for a different supplier, so that way they have their specific access. Now, if you don't care, then sure, you could put you could add those other users into the same supplier structure and things like that. So anyway, so I'm gonna go back. So supplier, that's my root, right? So if I come back over here under my bookmark roots, there they are. So I have my VED supplier and other different ones here as well. So you'll see, so I wanted to go ahead and create that, and that way I now have a structure for the suppliers, a folder structure like area where the suppliers can come into. Okay, so now how do we share data or information with our supplier or other groups or people that we want to have access to specific models, data, things like that? So how do we do that? So here I am as the Razorleaf engineer. I am on my Getting Started dashboard. So first thing I want to do is switch to my dashboard I created specifically for this. And in here, I have the Product Explorer widget that I've added from my apps. And I also have a Bookmarks tab that I've created, and I added the different bookmarks to it, the bookmark widget. So the first thing I want to do is let's take a look at the structure that we're working on. So this is the CAD structure, the entire VED assembly that we're working with. And I'm going to expand this, and as the engineer, I have access to everything, okay? Now, my goal is to give access to a different group. Maybe it's a supplier, maybe it's a specific group in the company that's working specifically on the chassis and a rim or something like that. So whichever it is, whatever the case is, I want to give them access, but not to the entire structure, but only to specific areas or specific items. So let's take a look at the front chassis. And if I drill down into the substructure underneath there, I see the subchassis here, and then I see the individual components as well. Okay. Now to share this is the item I want them to look at and be able to have access to be able to do measuring or whatever planning they need, or even additional design work. Okay. So one of the things I want to be able to do is I want to share this with them. Now, in order to share it, I have to give access to it. So I'm going to select the object. I'm going to select my information panel, and I'm going to look at the sharing category. And with that sharing category, right now it's telling me it's not shared. Okay. Now, I also want to look at, this is actually the level I want to give them access to, is at this part level, this component components where I want to give them to. Now, in order for them to see this one, it means they have to be able to navigate from the top level through here, all the way to this one. So that means that I have to give them access to here, 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 and here. And maybe I want to give them edit access here, but only read access at the different levels. However you decide is up to you. So let's start with this one. And I'm going to select the share icon, and I'm going to read, or we can say edit here. So I'm going to say designer can read it, or excuse me, edit it at this level. Okay. Now that's shared. And then at this level, I want to say they can read at this level. Now be careful, because if they make modifications to it, then the next level up, they need to be able to edit that one as well to make any adjustments or, you know, the changes, revisions, and things like that. So I'm going to give it an edit. And I'm going to say share. Now at this level, I want to say, I only want them to view it, right? So I'm going to add designer here to view. and I'm going to share it. Now, I'm going to go one more level up, and I want to show you what happens if you don't give them the right level, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and give the access to read here. Now, we've given read access to this one and this level, and we've given edit access from here to here, right? Now, at this level, we've given no access, right? So if you can imagine, the group, the person I want to be able to have access to here probably will not be able to see it because they can't see a level above it. So I'm going to look at my bookmark, and as this user in the engineering bookmark, I have this structure. So in this structure, I can see everything, okay? Because I'm logged in as engineer and I have access to everything. Under this bookmark, I can see everything. Now, I can also come over here and say sharing. If I look at the information panel here, and if I select sharing, right now the one person can manage. Now, I can give them access here as well. So I'm going to say access here, and I'm going to say read, and I'm going to say designer. And you'll notice that there's more options when sharing a bookmark. They can view it, read it, edit, manage, add or remove attachments. But for right now, I'm going to say that they can read this bookmark, okay? Now, one of the things you have to remember is that once you do this, indexing on the servers and everything else has to happen. And depending on the setting, it may be 3 to 5 minutes before that happens. So I'm going to pause here for a second, and I'm going to go check my other view, and I'll wait the time. Okay, so like I said, I've given access to read to the designer. So let's go see if the designer has access now. So as a designer, I come into my dashboard, and I'm going to select my supplier dashboard. In the supplier dashboard, I have a bookmark editor, and I see the different bookmarks I have access to. And there's the VED Engineering. Now, when I select VED Engineering as the supplier, I have no access to anything. Look at my other bookmark folders, I don't have access to anything. So the challenge now is making sure that my strategy for sharing objects and things like that work well and give access to the objects without giving too much. So as the engineer, let me go back and review what I've shared and then make sure that they have the appropriate access at the top levels to be able to drill down into that one component. So as I mentioned earlier, as it is in engineering, what we gave access to is the chassis itself. Now, they can't see this chassis because this top level isn't shared. So let's go ahead and share the top level with the designer, and we'll say read. We'll share it. And again, remember, indexation has to happen before the other person can see it. So let's go ahead and pause for a second and then wait for the indexation to happen, and then we'll check back with you as soon as that is there. Okay, so I believe indexation has happened, so let me switch over to the designer view. And if I look at the designer, and again, I'm logged into a different browser as designer, and let's see what we have access to now. So remember, we've seen the VED Engineering bookmark. We have access to that. And now we also have access to that top level. So if I expand the top level, I also have children underneath it. Now, these children that I could see are based on what was shared. Now, if I switch back over, remember, there's chassis at the top level, is underneath there's chassis. There are other objects there that I can't see. So here's chassis, shaft, wheel, right? So I can't see any of the other items because none of that was shared with me. So as the person here, now, how does that look in the 3D view. So let's just drag the top level over into my 3D Navigate, and let's take a look at it. The only thing I can see is the 3D data, the data and information that was actually shared with me. I don't see any of the other objects. Nothing else is visible to me. I don't have access to it in the tree. I don't have access to the 3D data as well. So let's switch back over to as the engineer, and let's go over to the wheel, and let's give them access to the wheel as well, but only the rim. Okay, so if I select this one, again, if I select sharing, I'm going to share this rim, and I'm going to say read. Select the designer and share it. Now, I've already said that if I don't give access to the levels above it, they won't be able to see that, right? So let's go ahead and give access to this one as well. And we'll share that. Okay. Now, at this level, we also need to give it here. Now, in the book, if I use a different interface, you can select multiples. But I'm just trying to show you what you need to do as far as how to share them. Okay. Now, I'm going to switch over as designer just to give you a sense of what it takes. So this is immediately, I'm going to refresh my interface, and you'll notice that I still don't see that structure. Okay, I don't see the wheel yet. Okay, so it's here. I don't see it yet. So if I refresh here, I still don't see the wheel. Okay, so the reason I don't, it's just because the servers and everything else haven't indexed yet. So I'll wait. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh again. Now if I expand my thing, now I see that there's the right wheel. If I expand that, if I look at the wheel, now I can see the rim as well. Notice I don't see the tire or anything else. So what does my 3D look like? So if I drag it over, there's the wheel. And it is in context. It is in the right position for everything else. So it knows where it belongs in relationship to the chassis and everything else, right? So you don't lose any of that information, and I can't move this. I can't move this around or anything else. Now, one of the other great things about this is, as the person that only needs to have access to the chassis and the wheel, if I open this in CATIA or so the native app, it's only going to open this information or these things that I have access to. Performance-wise, that means I'm not trying to open up an entire assembly when I'm only focused on a specific area, right? So performance-wise, this helps tremendously being able to control what you have to open and things like that. Now, I could also have created the supplier portal folder for it and things like that, and I'm going to, as the engineer, I could have also said, okay, well, let me take this chassis and I want to add it to the supplier chassis area. So I could have just dragged and dropped it here. So I'm going to go to my Product Explorer, and I'm going to go to my chassis, bookmarks, and I'm going to add it to the chassis here. If I drag and drop it from one bookmark to another, it wants to move it. Okay. So, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to take this one here. Go from my Product Explorer, and I'm also going to take the top level to the bookmark to the supplier. Oops. Sorry. So if I go to supplier, I'm going to drag that into chassis. Okay. So again, you can move things around. They're like folders and that kind of stuff. So now if I look at the chassis, I see the front chassis as well as the top level. Now, I've done this and thinking, well, I'll just drag and drop everything in. Well, if you drag and drop it at different levels, it comes across. So if I drop the top level assembly, it already contains all the other ones. I also dropped an individual one. I didn't need to, but I dropped the individual one and it shows up here. So I can right mouse click and say remove, not delete. Delete will actually delete it. Remove it will remove it from the bookmark structure. So now if I come back over as the designer in somewhere another location, so if I go to engineering, I see that here. If I go to supplier and chassis, I don't see it yet, but if I wait for indexation, it'll show up. So let's wait just a minute. Okay, so I refreshed and now I see that same structure. Now again, it's not a copy, it's just that I've shared a link to these objects in that folder structure, in that bookmark structure. So again, if I drag this over, it's still the same thing. I still only have access to what I have. So depending on how you want to set this up, you may create specific bookmarks for different groups or different departments or suppliers and things like that to control what each one of them can see. Or you can give them direct access to the bookmark that you're working in. Either way works. That's fine. Either way will function the same. It's just the strategy you take to be able to give other groups or other areas access to that information. Oh, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions. 1 second, I'll share my screen again as well.
Okay, Kip, thanks for that. We do have a few questions in. I don't want to get through here. Okay. So I don't know if this is a question or a statement. So the first one that came in, it said, what is the difference between leader, reader, author, and contributor role? Can you explain?
That's a huge request. I'm going to share my screen. So I'm not gonna, we won't have time to go through every bit of these. Can you see the help document here?
Yes.
So the responsibilities are defined in the help documentation, and it's quite extensive of what they are and what they mean, and how they apply to inherently apply to different organizations and collaborative spaces. So if you want, I'll share the link to this document, but there's several definitions that you can go through for public reader. There's also author restricted and other roles I didn't cover, but essentially, if you want, I'll share a link to this so that you can see what they are and see what the definitions are.
Yeah, we can include that with our follow-up if you want. Send that over to us.
Yep.
We can do that in the follow-up.
Great.
Okay. Yeah, there's another question about roles. What is the difference between baseline roles and CSC roles? What are they?
Yep, and what the ones that I've shown are baseline roles. Those are what they consider, if you have been around a while, the one-click or baseline roles. The CSE, customer-specific environment roles, you can customize and add additional functionality to them through like project manager or all kinds of other different built-in customizations that you can do to those roles that add or remove different functionalities and things like that on the CSE. If you're on public cloud, you won't have that option. If you're on the on-premise, you can set your environment to a CSE or a baseline. I'm not going into any of the CSE type roles. It's quite extensive, and it is a class. It's probably a week-long class all in itself. But these are, also in that same section, it'll give you what you can do in every state and different permissions that you have and things like that of the different types of data and what maturity state they're in and stuff like that as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kip. What is the significance of attribute DUNS number while creating a company?
So if you want to search or see the DUNS number of a company that the DUNS, let's say you want to set up a customer in your environment, having their DUNS number there is maybe help procurement if you're having other departments as part of the your PLM implementation. So they may need to see that for purchasing or things like that. So other departments might have a different requirement to be able to see that. I don't see it very often, but if you think of like Boeing's or very large customers that use the platform that involve a lot more domains in their enterprise into the platform, it may be important to them to be able to see that. Same thing like cage code, right? So if you have a supplier that you use, having their cage code is important to different engineering groups and things like that as well. So it's just important to other domains or other departments in the organization.
Okay, great. And the other one is just, there's one more here that's I think it's more of a comment, but Samir, if you have any more information or you want me to cover this in a different way, let me know. It says objects from the protected collab space prior to release state not visible to user. So I don't know.
Correct.
That's correct.
I agree with that statement. If I misstated that or wasn't clear, but yeah, in a protected collaborative space, the objects before they're released or obsolete are not visible. But once they're released or obsolete and protected, then they're visible to people who belong to that organization, have access to them, right? And that's why I set up two different organizations, because if my suppliers, I would never add them to my organization because of that reason. Once they're released or obsolete, they would be able to see that. But that's why I have two different organizations.
Okay, great. All right. Anyone else send me questions in the questions panel? Feel free. And I've got a couple of other ones here. Can you create new companies on the DS Public Cloud? You're just kind of covering that.
Yep, you can. It's not something they kind of teach or anything else. Most people don't. Most people of the DS Public Cloud, I don't see them needing it as much. But the more they get into requesting like a supplier access or bringing people in from other tenants, public tenants, then giving them access, it may be a requirement for security. And it's a really good reason to really vet out your people and organizational structure in your implementation, whether it's on premise or on cloud.
Okay, great. What licenses do you need to access Bookmarks?
Well, you need the combined of IFW and CSV, which is or a PCS license. Because Bookmarks are still tied to collaborative spaces, the data is stored or is part of the collaborative space. So the only way to access the collaborative space data is using a PCS or IFW and CSV. So if you only have an IFW, you won't be able to access Bookmarks or the contents of those Bookmarks.
Okay, great. Can you share access to Bookmarks to other tenants on the DS Public Cloud?
Yeah, so if you invite on the DS Public Cloud, you have the ability to invite users from other public cloud tenants. So if you invite them in, you can invite them or share access to your Bookmarks to them as well.
Okay, great. Anyone else have any questions? Otherwise, we'll move on. Let's give another minute or 30 seconds anyway. All right, I'm not seeing anything come in. Let's move on and talk about our next webinar.
So our next webinar is Unpacking 3DEXPERIENCE, the intersection of PDM and PLM. We're going to talk a little bit, use EPDM and 3DEXPERIENCE and how they interact and where they overlap in functionality between the two of them, and some things to consider when you're using an EPDM, so or SOLIDWORKS EPDM, EPDM Pro, and 3DEXPERIENCE, and where that data or PDM functionality overlaps. So we'll kind of cover some of those things in the next one.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks so much, Kip, for a great presentation and demonstration there. And we appreciate everyone joining us this afternoon. We'll be sending out these links, including a link to the references about the different roles in our follow-up email with the recording. So watch for that in your email in the next couple of days. And with that, we'll close out. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.